This debate is proudly brought to you by the Department of Economic Development, KwaZulu Natal.
Let's start with whether Africa is ready for this economic reawakening. In your opinion, is that a reality?
Morning to you, and let me say that Africa is very ready. We think it is high time that we have such a conference. It's a conference that must be focusing around entrepreneurship and ensure that we're actually increasing our productive capacity. And we know that for us as Africans, we're no longer asking for aid. We're now asking to do business with the world. And for us to do so, it means we must focus on entrepreneurship. We must focus on investment. We must also mobilize domestic investment and expansionary growth. And that's what Africa needs and needs most.
Infrastructure development is a key challenge across the African continent. What solution do you believe should be tabled on that front?
Well, one of the things, if you look at what happens throughout the world, particularly if you're looking at the emerging markets in the developing world, you are seeing more and more governments spending quite a lot of money out of their fiscals on infrastructure. And in this country, in South Africa in particular, we'll be spending around about 800 billion in the next 3 years. And in 10 years' time, we're actually estimating that we're spending around about 1 trillion. Now, what does this mean? It means, therefore, that the state must play a role in terms of the push and pull factors, because by spending in infrastructure, we open up the economies, particularly in the African continent, and we make it easier for business to invest, and therefore you reduce the input cost and the logistic cost.
Minister of Public Enterprises Malusi Gigaba yesterday saying that there's a 1.5 trillion rand backlog in infrastructure spend in South Africa. Do you think that public-private partnerships are the key to improving that situation? Absolutely perfect.
There is no way the state and the state alone can be able to actually deal with the backlogs on its own. And hence, therefore, that the state would require to be able to form partnerships with the private sector. And in forming those partnerships, we must ensure that there's a win-win. And our solution is a solution where we must see the growth of our economies, and we must actually create jobs, but we must ensure that the private sector is able to ensure that they do business with the government.
MEC, do you feel that we should embrace the Chinese and welcome their help in infrastructure development on the continent?
Well, our approach is this. In any development that takes place in Africa, it is good. However, what we must be very careful as Africans are the terms of the engagement, that when development is taking place, it must not take place on the basis that outside people are only doing it for us. They must do with us, and therefore we must participate, and therefore we must also become beneficiaries of the development. It must also be utilized in such a manner that it actually is able to stimulate growth, and that there is local content in terms of sourcing of materials, so that we actually prevent a situation where people bring in labor force from outside the continent, where they bring in money completely outside the continent, where they bring material outside of the continent. That would not be acceptable to us. We want to see real growth and real development. It can only happen if we combine the capital inflows into Africa as well as us in Africa benefiting and therefore having a multiplier effect in our own economy.
Moving on to the entrepreneur theme, how do you believe government can help entrepreneurs in South Africa? You mentioned earlier in the discussion that they are key to driving our economic growth going forward.
For us, what we say, small business is big business. We know throughout the world that if you want to create jobs in many parts of the world, those jobs come from your small and emerging enterprises. And for us, what is different is that we're saying the focus must move away where people are only interested in actual equities and stock. It's fine for business people to do so. But if we are going to be actually building the economy, we must actually produce goods that can actually be sold elsewhere in the world so that we can become productive. In that, we can actually ensure that our economies are growing, our economies are getting stronger, and hence, therefore, for us, entrepreneurship is the way to go. We don't want people who are going to be making money on the basis that others are working for them. We want people to go out there, put their own sweat, and then be able to make money. But as they make money, they actually are growing the economies, and they're employing many people who were unemployed at the moment.
And given that we are in KwaZulu Natal, how do you feel KZN can contribute to the growth opportunities on the African continent?
We are very clear. First and foremost, we are taking an approach that regional integration is the most way to go. And if you look at the regions of the world, you look at the EU, you look at NAFTA, you look at MEC or any other part of the world, regional blocks and regional markets are crucial. And for us, we're talking about the SADC market. Our leaders have now agreed that by the year 2015, we will have a single market in the SADC, and that by the year 2018, we may move towards a single currency. Now, what are we saying? Instead of focusing on the 50 million South African market population, we must talk about the 257 million market in the SADC. In that regard, we'll be able to increase trade between the region itself, but as we're actually able to trade with the emerging world, particularly BRICS, we'll be bringing the region behind us. In that regard, you can then be rest assured that not only South Africa becomes an economic enclave in the region, and that the whole region can share in the economic spoils.